Would you be able to stay awake 11 days straight for charity? Well, for some encouragement, there is a psychopath who will kill us if we happen to fall asleep. So we better ditch the pillows and stock up on coffee as we try to beat the movie Rapid Eye Movement. Let's go. We open with a man named Rick in a delirious state, hearing voices from the previous days. They say things such as, "Save the children, you can do it," and "Fall asleep and I'll kill you." Then we transition 4 weeks earlier. We see a man riding a bike on a walkway of a bridge. Someone concealed by a hood and scarf blocks the path with a rope. The cyclist is upset, saying that they have had enough of his pestering and that they're working as hard as they can to find a cure for the disease. But the hooded man just pulls out a knife and lunges at the cyclist. Now we cut to the next morning and see a corpse hanging from the same bridge with a sign written in blood that reads, "Save the children." Alright, I cannot blame the cyclist for being unable to avoid a knife attack while sitting on a bike, but we can blame them for not turning right around and taking a different path the moment he saw a man that he has apparently dealt with before blocking his way. Sure, he may not have expected them to attack, but if that man was willing to do suspicious things like blocking a path, then he probably did not have good intentions to begin with. We now see Rick, a radio host who finds obscure and unknown musicians and gives them exposure on the radio. After his latest discovery of a gypsy punk band, he dances to their music with his co-worker Teresa, much to the displeasure of their intern, Phil. Later, Rick goes to talk to his boss as the upper management member Steve comes in. They tell Rick that his ratings are too low and that they want him to start covering the top 40 songs instead of niche bands, or they are not renewing his contract. After getting mocked by his rival co-worker Marcus over this news, Rick is greeted by his wife Kathy, who is upset that he didn't attend their first marriage counseling session. Go figure. She is willing to give him another chance though and booked a very exclusive marriage retreat for the 28th of this month. He just needs to agree to go. After not showing much enthusiasm about this, she mentions how much sleep she has been losing over this. The comment suddenly gives Rick an idea, as he thanks her and rushes off to tell his team. Rick wants to do a sleep deprivation charity to improve his ratings, and even plans for it to coincide with his wife's retreat because he clearly doesn't want to go. The current world record is 264 hours or 11 days, so he wants to try and beat that. Well, good luck, my friend. He and his crew look into recent headlines for any disease to raise money for and stumble upon the bridge murder. Apparently the victim, Dr. Rance, was an SMA researcher, which stands for spinal muscular atrophy. It's a real disease that ranges from basic movement difficulty to full-on paralysis. The earlier it sets on, the more fatal it is, meaning it's extra deadly to children. So with this disease now being relevant from the murder, the gang decides to cover it for this charity. Rick will be stationed within a glass booth located in Times Square, with a webcam watching him the entire time, even during bathroom breaks, which we thankfully never see. They also hire a sleep research expert, Dr. Maurice Falco, to help and monitor Rick's health. Before the event starts, Rick gets a call at the radio station from a parent of an SMA child. They start off by thanking him and admiring Rick for his actions, quoting Robert Browning to do so, but the caller's tone soon turns ominous as they mention that this will take severe dedication, and claim that that is something Dr. Rance, the victim from the bridge, couldn't understand. Now Rick tries to get more information from the caller, but they hang up as Miguel, a co-worker, enters the room. Rick says that he believes that this was a bridge killer and wants to try and get them to confess on air. Miguel, though, recommends the wise decision of calling the police, but Rick says that he wants to milk the story first. Well, good luck, we know where this ends. The caller is clearly passionate about this disease, a bit too much so, and if they're willing to kill someone directly working towards a cure, they will 100% kill a selfish fundraiser host. We need to call the cops now. We can still attempt to catch him live on the air if the police allow it. Rick gets also chewed out by his wife for choosing the marathon to happen during the retreat. He tries to say it's for his job and catch a killer, but she doesn't believe him and goes to stay with her sister. Now day number 1 happens. We see Rick start off the wake-a-thon, giving a call to action to his listeners from inside the booth. 1 hour in and we can see they have already raised 2.6k. The doctor is taking Rick's vital signs as his rival Marcus comes in to once again mock Rick's situation. Suddenly, the suspected killer from before calls again. Rick asks for their name and number in case they get disconnected, which is a smart way to try and get the information innocently, but the caller doesn't fall for it. They claim Rick needs more passion, preaching about getting people to rise up, and tells Rick in quote, "Do not blow this." Alright, if we didn't call the cops before, now would be a good time to do so. An estimated researcher named Dr. Gray shows up to be a guest on the show. As Rick performs the interview, he brings up the bridge murder victim, which triggers the doctor, prompting him to go to the next pharmacy. The suspect now calls again, but this time with a threat towards Dr. Gray, which is yet another red flag and indicator that this guy might be the killer. After finding out that the caller's daughter has already died because of the disease, Rick sends a staff member to check on Dr. Gray. But it's already too late. The guy's dead, and a bunch of strangers gathered around him. Almost at the very same time, the caller finally adds a task Rick must accomplish if he doesn't want to be the next in line. He must raise $5 million before he next sleeps. Well, good luck with that. Well, staying awake is problematic for a prolonged time because you need to sleep. In fact, sleep is probably the most important thing next to food and shelter. So if we don't sleep for a prolonged time, we're probably gonna just die. Now, 11 days, as we will soon see, is a time frame our character must endure, is probably not enough to kill someone, at least based on my research not, but I for one would definitely go crazy and probably have a stroke, but that's just my guess for myself. Other obvious effects of lack of sleep is insane fatigue and of course a lack of focus. Pair these with a killer out to get us and the cards aren't in our favor. However, moving around helps promote blood flow, which helps keeping us alert. Walking around the booth or running in place would be a good idea. In fact, even something as simple as chewing bubblegum could help us. Caffeine and other drugs can be used as well, but we need to be careful of side effects and health risks, as it won't exactly be safe to leave for a hospital with an unknown killer after us. We also need to be careful about ingesting sugar to avoid having a crash later. We could also shock ourselves awake with cold water or sharp pain, so an ice bucket and a bunch of rubber bands or a needle would come in handy as well. Now, of course, all of this sounds more like a bunch of 15-year-olds trying to beat each other in who can stay awake longer, but hey, if it worked back then why not now? Now, after looking for ways to not sleep, we should look for ways to make money too, just in case the criminal isn't stopped in time. The best way to do this for this type of charity is to bring families and victims of the disease down for interviews and have them share their stories. 3 days in and Rick is looking delirious when a detective named Ron Murdoch arrives shortly after. Apparently, they have been trying to get a hold of him for 2 days, literally fearing for Rick's life, but a detective seems to assume that the calls are just a hoax and all of this is just a publicity stunt to increase ratings. To be fair, he isn't exactly wrong, at least partially. However, as a detective, you can't just arbitrarily decide who to believe and whom not. On the other hand, Rick could and should have made a bigger effort in contacting people that would actually take him seriously other than this guy right here. The detective goes on to say that for the last 2 days, they have been investigating the case, searching everyone involved with Dr. Gray, and found nothing. The autopsy report even shows that the cause of death was a heart attack, so they just believe it was a natural cause. He donates $1 and then leaves. We skip to the 4th day and Rick is even more delirious now, to the point of hallucinating a talking praying mantis. It insults him and claims that it has a date with his wife tonight, before pointing out a strange man in the crowd staring at the booth. Rick later gets another call from Browning, which is the name of the suspected killer, but this time on his cell phone, which is an important part. Now, Rick tries to question the killer on details about his deceased daughter, but he's reluctant to speak, but finally finds out that her name was Clarissa. With this new information, Rick calls Detective Murdoch, who shows up shortly afterwards. He shares the name he was given, but the detective doesn't really care, exclaiming that the 2 researchers' deaths are unrelated, and doesn't believe a killer would share evidence with a radio host. The cop leaves by saying that if he's called again to boost ratings, Rick will be arrested, which might not be the worst thing, right? If you're arrested, you're probably not a target anymore. The night ahead, Rick decides to start calling the random numbers from the SMA child death registry and accuse strangers of being Browning in hopes to find the killer. After failing to make any progress with that, and after a few bouts of paranoia, Rick and the crew start to dance wildly outside the booth. Phil ends up dancing with Teresa only to have Rick steal her away, which, just like at the start of the film, is much to Phil's displeasure. Rick then happens to see the older man who was staring at the booth previously and rushes to confront him, bumping into someone in the process. Due to his lack of sleep and excessive ego, he shoves the stranger and tells him to move, getting punched in the face as a deserved response. Afterwards, Rick and Miguel are sitting in the booth when they notice the donations haven't gone up in over 4 hours. Rick calls another co-worker, Charlene, to check what's going on. When she checks the account, she finds that all the money is missing. They have been hacked. If that wasn't enough, Browning calls now too, and Rick says that he saw him out in the crowd, as Browning confirms he saw Rick as well dancing with someone who is not his wife. Rick then accuses him of being a liar, saying that there was no Clarissa, but the killer just ignores this. Rick is then tormented by the CGI snake before Charlene shows up. She wants to call the cops about the missing money, but Rick says he doesn't want word to get out, hurting the fundraiser and possibly jeopardizing his life. Charlene theorizes Browning may have stolen the money, but Rick thinks that it wasn't him because they didn't mention it over the phone and because he cares about the cause too much. Both valid arguments. On day 6, Rick is chugging a Red Bull and looking around frantically. Dr. Falco recommends taking him to a lab, but he refuses and instead asks for the non-FDA stuff. The doctor steps out for a bit, only to return with a cartoonishly big shock prong that he zaps Rick with. Except that was just another hallucination, and he actually returned with pills. Despite warning Rick of their potency, he downs a mouthful of them like M&Ms. That night, after using some baby wipes to clean up a bit, he gets called by the local news. They ask if he has any comment about the donation money being missing. He denies it, and they ask if they can check his financial statements to confirm, believing that maybe he stole it. But Rick just hangs up on them. Probably a good move to hang up on them. You don't owe the news anything and never have to talk to them anyway. That said, the news shouldn't have found out about this unless someone within our crew told them. This tells us that there is someone at work who is against us, and they likely stole the money in the first place to ruin the fundraiser. Unfortunately, the list of suspects is a bit high. It could be our rival Marcus, who wants us gone, upper management who doesn't like the indie bands we cover, or maybe some intern we pissed off by encroaching on his crush. I wonder who it could be. The talking mantis from before returns again, insulting Rick and blaming him for everything, and then tells him to just die. It's my favorite character in this film, my friends. Day 8. Rick calls his wife because he feels he can't trust anyone else, but she says that she wants a divorce. In his sad state, Rick starts to have a pretty elaborate hallucination because he's actually dreaming. He is snapped back to reality by Dr. Falco and Teresa and immediately goes on the air to promote the charity. Charlene enters the booth and says that she got complaints from parents who are in the SMA support group, claiming that Rick has been calling them in the middle of the night to see if their children are really dead. Yeah, that was a jerk move. He confesses to doing this in order to try and find Browning, but gets scolded for harassing grieving families. Dr. Falco then gets the idea that maybe Browning's daughter isn't on a death list to begin with, because she didn't actually die of SMA. On day 9, we see Phil ask out Teresa only to get shot down. He then stares at her like a serial killer because this movie knows no subtlety. In the booth, Rick is interviewing a parent that lost her child to SMA. The parent mentions that at least her little girl passed away while sleeping, and Rick insensitively states that he would love to go for a nap too right now. Now let's be honest, that was a jerk move, but it's kind of funny, okay? Now the mom, to our surprise, is very understanding of this as he is very tired and continues with the interview. But Rick keeps on saying rude and insulting things due to his exhaustion, eventually pushing her to her limit, causing her to slap him across the face and storms out. Charlene then walks up to Rick and slaps the heck out of him as well, saying that no matter how tired he is, this was uncalled for. Teresa rushes to Rick's side and comforts him, making the excuse that he can't help it being so tired. Phil then enters, sees Rick in Teresa's arms, and then leaves in disappointment. Browning then calls, angry at Rick for upsetting a guest. Rick states he's losing everything over this, but Browning claims that he lost everything too, saying his wife left him when their daughter died. Rick then uses a pair of binoculars to try and find Browning among the crowd outside. He doesn't see the killer, but does find Charlene and Larrabee from upper management smooching, causing him to believe that they are conspiring against him and stole the donation money together. Rick's Mantis pal is back too and tries to convince him to murder Charlene for conspiring against him. Rick doesn't follow through with that thankfully, but does confront her about the kiss. She hints that she's doing it for the job, which is its own sick issue entirely. Rick then suspects just Larrabee himself stole the money and asks Charlene to send him over at night so he can expose him in a subtle way. Later we see that a subtle way is to grab this man by the collar and accuse him directly. Nice plan. But turns out that Larrabee wasn't even aware that the money was stolen, and now that he knows, he is going to shut down the entire charity. Rick begs him not to, stating his life depends on it, and even agrees to play the popular top 40 if he lets the charity continue. When that doesn't work, Rick tries blackmail, stating that he will expose the fact that Larrabee accepts money from artists to put their songs on the top 40. This doesn't work either though, and he steps out. His boss Cliff overhears this threat though and asks how Rick knew about the kickbacks, but Rick admits he was just bluffing. Rick starts to get confused after this, and it comes to Dr. Falco shining a pen light into his eyes, claiming that he is technically awake while in REM state, which stands for rapid eye movement. They want him to quit this for his own health, with the doctor saying that if he doesn't stop, he will freeze to death, even in 100-degree weather, because his body won't be able to regulate its internal temperature. Yeah, that is not how this works, my friends. This is quite insane. Our bodies do struggle to adjust internal temperature more when we're tired, but no, we'll not freeze to death after being awake for a couple days. Rick then claims he himself is an imposter as he runs outside to find the real Rick, with Miguel running after him. Rick is interviewing an SMA child named Brett as he communicates with his wheelchair's text-to-speech. After asking people to donate for a cure, he then asks Brett if he has anything to say, and the kid says to never give up. That's deep. This seems to really inspire Rick as he contemplates later that night about being the beacon of hope and light for others. He calls Kathy to tell her this, but she is still angry, obviously, asking if he was planning on just faking his death after this embezzlement. Rick is confused, and me too. But after struggling to recall his password, radio_God, he logs into his banking account to see that the donation money is in fact in his account. Kathy says that the news got a hold of their bank statements and know everything, and it's suddenly making the front page of the news, specifically on a newspaper apparently delivered at night, for some reason. People in Times Square are mad, yelling and throwing things at this radio booth. Rick talks to his boss over the phone, explaining he's being set up and begging not to be shut down, but the boss says they can lose their license and hangs up. Phil smugly leaves, calling Rick a radio god. Browning now calls, telling Rick he ruined everything and that he is on his way to murder him. Guess we should thank him for the heads up. We need to call the cops again. Worst case, they put us in jail, where again, we should be safe. Now Rick runs out of the booth and down the street before calling Marcus of all people for help. He begs to be put on the air, but Marcus refuses and says to just call the cops. Guess he is a bit more rational since he has actually slept in the past week. Browning then calls Rick, who makes it a conference call so Marcus can hear and put it on the air. After hearing the killer's voice, Marcus reluctantly complies. Rick happens to see Phil now, who is just standing around for some reason, and confronts him about the embezzlement. As the two argue, Browning is now seen watching them from across the street, and Rick tells him to kill Phil for taking the money. Not sure if you want to be saying things like that while on air. But alright. Now both men run into the nearest building while Browning gives the chase. They try to get the lone security guard there for help as the killer slowly approaches with a gun. The security guard is shot in the shoulder as two men run upstairs, giving their location over the phone. Browning knocks the guard unconscious and follows them. The two hide on a random floor behind the desk as Rick tells Phil that he shouldn't have stolen from sick children, and that he was just trying to improve his ratings so he didn't have to do top 40s that are paid for. Larrabee hears this over the radio and tries to immediately get the broadcast pulled, but is fired by Cliff on the spot for just confirming that he's taking bribes. Rick then asks Phil what cut he was getting in return for his sabotage. He confesses that he just did it because he was jealous of Teresa paying more attention to Rick than him. Now Browning shows up, knowing exactly where to look somehow. Rick throws a stapler to create a distraction, and Phil takes the opportunity to run, but is shot in the arm for doing so. Rick runs deeper into the building and into a random office room, but is soon found by Browning's magical tracking abilities. Now since Rick knows Browning is around the corner and about to find him, he should really prepare to attack first with a chair or any heavy object from the room, and catch Browning by surprise. Instead of immediately killing him, Browning decides to beat Rick with the butt of his gun, repeating "you failed" during each strike. Rick gets him to stop by mentioning Clarissa and figured out that her name wasn't on a death list because Browning murdered her himself. The reason why he would do that, because he was unable to take the pressure of raising a child that needed so much support. Jesus Christ, Now Browning confesses to drowning her, making the excuse that she was suffering. But Rick points out that he was the one suffering, and he gave up too easily. But they don't have to give up here and can still raise money for kids in need. It seems like this kind gesture is about to work for a peaceful conclusion, but Browning decides Rick still needs to die. As he points the gun, Rick says, "I love you, Kathy," and then accepts his fate. But Murdoch, the detective, finally arrives and immediately kills Browning. As the detective checks if Rick is okay, the radio host is reminded that he is a fake and runs out to look for the real Rick. He runs back to Times Square where he sees a street performer grow wings like an angel. Alright? Kathy then finds him there and immediately takes him back, as if anything he has done makes him a better husband. He then falls asleep in her arms and everything is good. So, Rick managed to beat a world record, helped take down a murderer, raise a small fortune for charity, and even got the girl. Not a bad week, and after that, I think we could all use some rest. Good night and binge another one. Thanks for watching.